Hello. Well, Boris has gone. How do you feel about that? Sad or glad? Perhaps that depends upon your political allegiances. Personally, I'm a mixture of both. Whatever you may think of him, he did have an ability to connect with people of all sorts. Will any future Tory leader be able to win the votes of what's known as the Red Wall in the way that he did? He had the potential to unite the country in a way that we've not been united since the last war. His rise and fall says interesting things about our country's moral state. It was well known when he came to power that he'd had women and children all over the place. We're not sure if we know where they all are even now. We've had prime ministers like this before, of course. Think of Lloyd George. But leaders in times past will keep indiscretions well away from the public eye. The public in those days wouldn't have worn it. But of course, this is the tolerant, updated, modern 21st century. And we moderns don't bother about fusty, old, outdated notions like marital fidelity. Thus, Boris becomes Prime Minister. If you've read Tom Bower's unofficial biography of Boris, you'll see the forces that shaped him. In part, a largely absentee father who had little ability to think about anyone but himself. Bear with me. Thus, the seeds of selfishness, an inability to consider other people and the effects our actions might have on them were sown into Boris's character. I wonder whether Boris comprehends now how he lost power. The encouraging thing about his fall, if you can call it encouraging, is that it demonstrates that people in power in this land and its general public won't tolerate a whole pattern of mendacity and moral fudge from their leader. Something you can't take as a given in some of the parts of the world I've been to, where leaders can get away with anything. Over half a century ago, when the Church of England were desperately trying to turn me into something like a vicar, we used to visit a high security prison. What struck me, talking to the inmates, was that human sin isn't specific. It spreads like a rash. People weren't just murderers or just rapists. The crime they were serving time for was just a symptom of a whole pattern of immorality and selfishness. All this leads me to a worrying statistic. If you define absent father as someone who's been completely disappeared for over 6 years, 76% of young men in UK prisons have absent fathers. Young women from similar backgrounds are statistically more likely to suffer from low self-esteem, depression, inability to build relationships, and addictions. Are we producing little Borises and little Megans, people whose childhood disables them from truly caring about or being servants to anyone but themselves, in such numbers that we will lose the freedoms that can only exist when most people have a desire to treat other people well? Maybe the fate of this country doesn't lie with our leaders, but with the ordinary rank and file like you and me, and the quality of the children that we produce. In the Bible, Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34 says this: righteousness exalts a nation, not prime ministers. Maybe morality, rather than charisma or ability, makes a nation great. and morality grows or diminishes from the strength of our connection with God. Bye-bye.